uh, Center Bank of United States of America, Fed Reserve, that's taking a hawkish mode right now. Hawkish mode in the sense they are in the spree of increasing their interest rate. So when we talk about the global center bank trends, we have to start with what's happening in the US Fed right now. When they go hawkish, the center banks of the emerging countries or the fragile countries including Brazil, Turkey, and emerging countries like India, there's an impact on our economy. In the sense, if we don't increase our interest rates, then the FPIs, the foreign portfolio investors, they are going to take a decision that they will take the money out of our economy and they will go to a country where the interest rates are very attractive. So this is dilemma number one. Second, a few students might have taken a look into the Jackson Hole meetings which happened early this year. And the Jackson Hole meetings, that gives you a narrative of what's the thought process of Jay Powell, who is a center bank chief or the center bank chair of US Fed Reserve. So Jay Powell, he articulated that US Fed Reserve is going to decrease their balance sheet. In the process, they are going to increase their interest rate and they will continue that. A series of interest rates, it's going to be a reality. Now, how do we respond to that? Because the dollar is getting stronger. Do we need to do an interest rate defense to this? What is interest rate defense? We also increase our interest rates. So what is MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee in India? That's a group of, RBI core economists and external members. They constitute a center bank independent. Instead of RBI governor, now talking about the policy narratives, we have a unit, or we have a monetary policy committee. So this monetary policy committee now, the members are divided. On one hand, external members, Professor Ashima Goyal, Professor Jain Verma, they are making right noises that we have reached a terminal point of interest rate. We cannot increase it further because if we increase it further, it's going to affect our growth recovery process. So we have reached a terminal interest rate. So either we need to follow a status quo with no change in interest rates, or we should think about decreasing the interest rate. So that's their stand. But the core RBI economists within, like RBI governor, and Dr. Michael Patro, they are into a hawkish mode because their argument is, of course, growth recovery is a concern. We have not got back to the normalization procedure into a neutral stance. We have articulated that we are into a sequence of accommodative policy stance. That's the way we have talked about the monetary policy. So what Michael Patra, what RBI Governor Shaktikan Das, Dr. Shaktikan Das, their articulation is, we are not yet ready for a status quo interest rates or to decrease interest rate because the rupee is on a free fall. And financialization of savings is a major concern. And negative interest rate is a reality in our country. What is negative interest rate? Nominal interest rate minus inflation. So nominal interest rate is now around 5 to 6%. And inflation is now mounting above 7%. So nominal interest rate minus inflation is the real interest rate, and that is negative. It's a matter of concern because it affects financialization of savings. In the sense, financialization of savings, your parents have term deposits in bank. So if they are not even getting the money they deposited in the bank, what's the purpose of savings in financial sector? Then the tendency of your parents is to take the money out from the financial sector and we will search for real estate or something else or the equity markets or stock exchange. But that's highly risky. But the thing is that the interest rate is plummeting like anything. So these are concerns. On one hand, growth recovery is a concern. So we need to keep the interest rate lower. On the other hand, I started my lecture with what's happening in the US. They are into a hawkish mode. So unless we increase our interest rate, then the capital is going to be flighting. And if the interest rate is not lucrative, it affects the financialization of savings. On the top of that, we need to see the global economic headwinds. Now, there is mounting inflation. To tackle the inflation, we have to increase the interest rate. So, if you were the RBI governor, what stance you would have taken? I will open this question in the question answer session. You can talk to me. On one hand, you prefer to be with Ashima Goyal and Jayant Verma and think that we have reached a terminal interest rate. The upper bound of interest rate is 5.96. Bas, ho gaya, bahut ho gaya. So now we have to start thinking about the economic growth recovery process. Or you see a point that the rupee is on free fall. What are the ways in which the RBI can do the toolkits which are available for the RBI to intervene and stop the rupee from a free fall? One is high frequency intervention in the foreign exchange market. But, that can affect the foreign exchange reserve. The foreign exchange reserve will, get reduced. So we cannot do a high frequency intervention in the foreign exchange market to support the rupee. So what is another toolkit is use of capital controls. In 2013, when the rupee was on a free fall, we used the capital controls. But we realized through a hard way that capital controls didn't work better. High frequency intervention in the currency market that led to the decline in the foreign exchange reserves. So interest rate defense was quite powerful. Why interest rate defense is quite powerful? We need to look into the deep cause or the roots of what is leading to the free fall of rupee. What's leading to the strengthening of US dollar? It's, the policies taken by J. Powell, the central bank governor, by increasing the interest rates. So if you don't increase your interest rate, if you don't take a stand of interest rate defense, then what's going to happen? Our FPI, foreign portfolio investors, that's a hot money that responds to high interest rates. So this interest rate differential is a core to this matter. So we need to reduce that interest rate differential. That's why I mentioned that interest rate defense is a powerful, toolkit to operate right now. But we have concerns that if you go on increasing the interest rate, it's going to affect the growth recovery process. How? Because we need to keep the credit cheaper. If the credit is not cheaper, then that affects the entrepreneurs. Because for the investment decisions, entrepreneurs need the credit to be cheaper. And another important point is the cost of borrowing of the government will go up. When the interest rate go up, we are financing the deficit through bond market. It's a bond financing. So that can affect the bond financing of deficit. The cost of borrowing will go up. So this is a real dilemma. And when we floated new monetary policy framework in our country in 2016, we didn't have a reality of high fiscal deficit or high debt at that time. So we thought that the cost of borrowing may not be a problem. We can focus entirely on price stability. Because as per the new monetary policy framework, the significant role of the central bank is price stability. They have to look into the inflation. But there can be a conflicting nature of the priorities, in the sense, if they focus on inflation, when the inflation happens, they have to increase the interest rate to tackle that. But increasing the interest rate can affect public debt management. So RBI, as an institution which deals in the public debt management and also in inflation targeting, that can be little tricky, because this is of conflicting interest. Okay, I will explain to you. High debt then the interest payment will go higher. Interest goes up means the North Block will make right noises to the RBI, please reduce the interest rate, and it's always a tug of war. And the North Block, that's our Ministry of Finance, they always want the interest rates to be lower because they have to lend credit to medium and small industries. They have to do the credit infusion into the economy. For that, the people to access the credit properly, we need to have the cost of credit lower. Now, have you heard about two important variables in macroeconomics during your undergrad? One is R and other is G. R is real rate of interest and G is real growth of economy. So when we talk about the cost of borrowing and the public debt management, we need to understand that the R has to be less than G. If R, the cost of credit, that is a real rate of interest, if that is greater than G, the growth of economy, then, using the debt, we are not growing out of the debt. Isn't it? Because the cost of credit is greater than the real growth of the economy. So for the public debt management, for the debt to be sustainable, we need to know that our R has to be less than G. This is very important to look into. Now, if the R is less than G, then focus on the inflation containment using the inflation targeting. So you're with me, right? If you are an RBI governor, what is the decision you're going to take? And one part of your class can think that we are hawkish governors, so we will increase the interest rate. Other part, they think that no, growth recovery process is very crucial. Cost of borrowing or cost of credit going up will affect the investment, so we will not. So the class can be, you can debate upon this issue when, you learn about this in your macroeconomics class. So the debate, the students who support rise in the interest rate, they argue that we cannot see a free fall of rupee. We need to defend the rupee. Let the rupee stabilize. Till then, we do interest rate defense. And financialization of savings is so crucial. So we will increase the interest rate so that savings will be safe, and we will be happy with our term deposits, because in India, financialization of savings is coming down. If you look at the data, it's a matter of concern. Then you also argue that this is a period of global mounting inflation globally, and it is affecting our economy. So to tackle that, inflation first, growth next. So that's a stand we are going to take. That's what one group of students, if they believe in a hawkish mode, they are going to tell. This is what I have been explaining so far. Then I also mentioned in this process, there is a public policy coordination. Public policy coordination in the sense, monetary policy and fiscal policy needs to be coordinated. If monetary policy cannot focus on the growth recovery process right now, if they are focusing on the inflation containment, then the fiscal policy needs to support. And how fiscal policy can support? The fiscal policy needs to be accommodative. And what is the meaning of fiscal policy is accommodative? That is, you facilitate the growth process even if your debt is mounting or deficit is mounting. Now, take a look into the figures. The deficit in our country has reached to 9% of GDP 2 years back. Now we have reduced it to around 6%, and we are anticipating that we have a fiscal consolidation path, a medium-term fiscal framework in which over the years by 25-26 we will reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.5. So that's a roadmap given. Right now, if you compel or coerce the economist to go ahead with the compression of expenditure and to have this fiscal deficit at 3%, it affects the growth recovery process, because we need expenditure. We cannot do expenditure compression, because other way to control the deficit is tax buoyancy, right? If you have a lot of revenue, then using that revenue, you can control the deficit and expenditure can go on. But this is a period of revenue uncertainty. So expenditure compression is the only plausible path. Then it can affect, because expenditure compression means you cannot touch the committed spending. Then you start reducing the capital spending. When you reduce the capital spending, when there is decline in the gross capital formation in the economy, that will affect the growth process. So what's the narrative right now in India is, we have high fiscal deficit, we have high debt, but we are using it for financing the capital infrastructure. We are using this debt for reducing the output gaps. And what exactly is the output gap? The potential of our economy, the potential output and the actual output, which is the GDP. So actual output is the GDP numbers we have. And how GDP is calculated? We have a gross value added and a fisc. Gross value added means this is the growth in different sectors, primary, secondary and tertiary sectors. And fisc is indirect taxes minus subsidies. So GVA plus fisc, and the fisc, when you expand, it is indirect taxes minus subsidies. So that's the way the new methodology of GDP. The GDP is calculated through this new methodology of GVA plus fisc. And fisc is indirect taxes minus subsidies. So that's the way it is. Now, coming to the potential output, it's a tricky thing because it is an unobserved variable. How do you capture an unobserved variable? Potential. Even your potential you want to reach, but you cannot word it or quantify the potential growth in you, right? The potential or the capacity in you, that then what RBI, North Block, IMF, various economists, how they arrive at this unobserved variable, they tackle it through using the filters. Filters in the sense they take the growth series. The growth series has two components, like you have the cyclical and structural component or the trend component. So take out the cyclicality component and call the trend and that as the potential. So that's a potential output. So you can appreciate in the inflation targeting equation, there are two unobserved variables. One is inflationary expectations. Expectations is unobserved. And the other is the potential output. So inflation targeting means you are pegging your interest rate based on an inflation anchor. Inflation anchor, by definition, is the comfortable inflation or officially allowed inflation in a country. So that differs across countries. If it is 2% in America, we thought that officially 4% is the officially allowed inflation in India. Then we have a band, 4% plus 2. So up to 6 we can tolerate, but beyond 6, if the CPI, that's the inflation which RBI monitors. So if CPI goes beyond 6%, it's not comfortable at all. And if 3 consecutive quarters inflation go beyond 6%, then RBI governor is answerable. In the parliament, he has to come and defend. So we are waiting for his answer. Now with 3 consecutive quarters, it's above 6%, and now he's writing the statement to explain that why it is up. And in a way, he's protected or he can defend because the inflation, the root cause, it's not monetary right now. You can understand that we had a lot of supply chain disruptions due to the pandemic. And after this war in Ukraine, there is energy price volatility. And, these are all affecting through the supply side our inflation. So it's not an internal thing. This global economic head with that, affecting the the inflation in our country. And imported inflation is also there. Imports are getting costlier. So if you look into the current account deficit, which is X minus M, the imports are getting costlier and exports are not promising in the global market. If you look into the numbers, the export presence, that is less than 1% in the global market, India's. So what to do? X minus M is your current account deficit, and that's mounting. So as long as we can finance that through the capital account, then it's fine. Because that balance of payment has got 2 components. One is the current account deficit, the other is the capital account. So if the capital flows are stable, you can finance the current account deficit X minus M through the capital flows. But when this Ben Bernanke, okay, he got the Nobel Prize. I will get into Ben Bernanke's policies immediately after the financial crisis. I will talk about that in a while. But right now, Jay Powell is their central bank chair. So he's in a hawkish mode. So he's increasing. So the capital is getting flighty. So we need to do an interest rate defense. So X minus M in Rekram Rajan's period, when he was the central bank governor, X minus M, that went up to around above 4%. Then we got panic. Our current account deficit was going up and the fiscal deficit was mounting, twin deficit. So then we try to finance it through the capital flows. But the moment the capital become flighty, Rekram Rajan even called the policies of US Fed Reserve as beggar thy neighbor policies. Like, it's affecting the fragile economies, and it's a matter of big concern. One center bank, US center bank, through this hawkish mode, is coercing the world economy into recession. How? When they increase the interest rate, then the emerging markets and the fragile economies, they also try to increase the interest rate at the cost of growth recovery process, and recession is going to be a reality. So monetary policy, the efficacy of the monetary policy in supporting the growth is getting affected. So is this a good idea? Why they are into this hawkish mode? So these are the questions now, economists are asking to the US Fed Reserve. But, by mandate, when FOMC meetings happen, or by mandate, they need not look into what happens externally. They are doing it because their mandate is output. They measure in terms of employment. We measure in terms of GDP, because that's a narrow economy. So it's like when we talk about the output gap reduction in that inflation targeting framework, they are talking about potential employment and actual employment. So employment is a matter of concern for them. But in the process, if it is affecting the global markets, then they need to take a call on what is the terminal rate of interest they are going to be playing with. So that can give a clue, because the currency, not only rupee, the other currency are also volatile. That their forex market is also volatile. It's not only rupee. So that's happening. So it's like coercing the world economy into deeper recession. And we need to have policy kits to respond to this and avoid a deep recession. So what are the policy kits? On one side, the efficacy of monetary policy is limited. It's partial, because it has to focus on inflation containment. It has to focus on the international finance and global challenges, energy price volatility. So what fiscal policy can do in growth recovery process? So they have to focus on the gross capital formation, and they have to focus on employment generation, sustainable employment generation. But there's an element of humanitarian crisis also here, because as economists, we should not be stopped at the level of what is called growth. There is something called beyond growth, that is about the humanitarian concerns, because COVID was basically a human tragedy. We are in the process of overcoming that, what has happened. So in the post COVID or post pandemic fiscal policy strategy, we need to keep it accommodative, and we have to live with high fiscal deficit, but with a clear roadmap to reduce it in the medium term to 4.5%. And where is this articulation of 4.5% coming from? Because we heard in the Maastricht Treaty that 3% of GDP, that's a way that fiscal deficit needs to be managed. And we also followed 3% in our country. Over the years, we over-adjusted to these fiscal rules. Now, when we think about the efficacy of monetary policy, or the effectiveness of monetary policy is limited or partial, we also need to understand what is the relevance of fiscal rule in this context. Do we need a fiscal rule? And students can take a look into the works of, this Peterson Institute, blog you can take a look, project syndicate papers you can take a look into. So the articulation is that we need not follow a strict fiscal rule this moment, because if the monetary policy, the efficacy is limited, and if the fiscal policy is also going to be very stringent, and that is going to affect the fiscal space and the growth recovery process. So we are ready to keep the fiscal policy on an accommodative mode with a clear roadmap of reducing the deficit in the long term or in the medium term. And this 4.5 articulation, where it came from, maybe one reason is 3 plus 1.5, right? In the pandemic time, I mentioned that our deficit went up to 9%, and that 9% of GDP deficit was not entirely the new policy designed for this, tackling the pandemic. It was also a part of budget transparency. In the sense, central government and the state governments have the tendency now to go beyond the purview of the fiscal deficit and to engage the borrowing process with the public sector entities, with the corporate bodies. So that off-budget borrowing, we call it as OBB. So that is also incorporated, a part of it was incorporated in the fiscal deficit, and they called it as 9% GDP, our fiscal deficit, but that was not entirely fresh money. It was like the prior OBB, what has happened beyond the purview of fiscal deficit, the deficit which is incurred through the public sector borrowings, that is also incorporated into the deficit. So if you're not understanding this in detail, don't worry at all, because you keep these ideas in the back of your mind. The moment you tune your radio or TV in February, in 2-3 months time, when you hear those discussions related to the budget, then you will be immediately able to connect. It will ring. So that's the purpose of this lecture. So don't worry if you're not able to follow it 100%, but I know 90% or 75%, I know it's happening within you, but don't worry if it is not 100%, if it is entering. But I know that I'm speaking to you in a very, I hope in a very the non-technical manner, and the students are able to appreciate and connect to what I am talking about. You just imagine yourself in that hot seat as an RBI governor, and you take a decision, and then you have to defend your decision. That's the way it is. So you have to think about what are the macroeconomic channels. Now, I was talking so far about the monetary policies policy rate. That's a rate in which the RBI lent to the commercial banks. That's a repo rate. Now, there is a term called monetary policy transmission. What is monetary policy transmission? The rates which is happening between the RBI and the commercial banks, that has to transmit to the decisions of commercial banks. If they don't increase the interest rate, it is not going to help the financialization of savings. And if you ask me, after increasing the interest rates, if there is a corresponding increase by the commercial banks about our term deposits, if you ask me, my answer is partial. All the banks have not increased that interest rate which can help our savings. But that is monetary policy transmission. Or if they reduce the interest rate, then if the commercial banks doesn't decrease the rates that for the loan or the credit, then we won't get the benefit. Entrepreneurs won't get the benefit. Then the investment cycle is not complete. So that is also crucial, the monetary policy transmission mechanism. And another term you have to be very thorough with is term structure of interest rate. Term structure of interest rate in the sense the short-run interest rates and the long-term interest rates are connected. That's a term structure. So whatever happens in this reference rate, that will affect your long-term interest rates, like the bond market rate. So that term structure also needs to be connected, or the longs and the shorts needs to be connected. So there are many things related to this. Now, when I talk about the central bank, I need to talk to you about the new trend in the monetary policy stance. The new trend is we need to talk about climate change related risk and uncertainties. And some governors or some chief of central bank, they are not open to this idea of climate change related risk and uncertainties. So their argument is our primary mandate is price stability. How can we enter into climate? Of course, climate change is real. We are concerned about it. Let the fiscal policy makers move. Policies related to that. Why should we get into this? Because it will affect our. It will lead to reputation risk for us. It will affect our reputation. That's the way a few central bank chief respond to this climate change related. So as a governor, you have to think about it. Will you go green? Greening of monetary policy is relevant or not? And our RBI, our central bank, there's a chapter in the State of Economy report in the RBI bulletin on greening of monetary policy. So they do accept the fact that the climate change, the floods, uncertainties, they're all affecting the financial decisions. So what is a toolkit available here? Bank of England, for the first time, they floated a stress test, green stress test, in the sense all the top financial companies, financial investors, they need to articulate what is the risk that's emanating from this climate change related risk and uncertainties. So that's very crucial to articulate. We also may ask the investors to come up with a stress test very soon. And Christine Lagarde, the chief of European Central Bank, she is very vocal about, climate change related risk and uncertainties. But I know Rekuram Rajan is not happy with this idea of monetary policy responding to climate change. So his argument is that, if you don't have enough toolkits, we get into the political economy. And the political economy narratives, central bank governor may not be able to handle. But, finance minister or finance ministry will be able to handle the political economy narrative, in the sense we need to distinguish between what's a green infrastructure, green bond, then what is brown bond. So this distinction and getting into these details may not be possible for a central bank chief or the top. But, fiscal policy makers can get into this. For instance, in last February, Government of India announced green bond. What exactly is green bond? If you finance the deficit through the bond financing, earmark a portion of the bond financing for green infrastructure. That's a green bond. So we don't have the estimates right now. We have to see the next budget, and we need to see what kind of investment that has happened for the green infrastructure. But it was announced in the last budget that India is going ahead with climate bonds. But climate bond is not a new phenomenon at all in the Indian context, because private companies, the private green bond is there, the climate bond is there. But for the first time ever, Government of India is thinking about earmarking a portion of the financing of deficit to green infrastructure, and that's welcome. And even by Finance Commission, they have to take a decision of the flow of funds, the divisible pool of taxes we have. In that flow of funds, the climate change criterion is included to take a decision about how much money needs to be given, the share needs to be given across states. So that is also dependent on the climate change criterion, which is the net forest cover along with population, area, the tax effort of the state governments, everything, because principle of subsidiarity is given importance over here. Now we have already reached 7:19, so we have only 10 minutes more. Given this backdrop of the discussion we had right now, you ask me questions. I will write down your questions and try to address your concerns. So that's the way I think we can spend the rest of the time. So the floor is open, and I hope that Dr. Nandu will do the roundtable and coordinate. And if there are any questions in the chat box, Archa can also read that to me. And students, if there is any clarification, you talk to me. Language is not a barrier. എനിക്ക് മലയാളം സംസാരിക്കാൻ അറിയാം. So terms ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ ആക്കിയിട്ട് you can ask me questions. എന്നോട് ചോദ്യങ്ങൾ മലയാളത്തിലും ചോദിക്കാം. But I need to hear your voice. Over to you.